Death Note, it's directed by Adam Wingard, it's now on Netflix, and I'm sure no other YouTube critics have touched it. I'm sure no one's pointed this out already. It's not good.
I promise you, you will not survive.
Before going into the full review, I'm going to clarify one or two points. One, I have watched the most popular form of this idea, Death Note. I've watched the TV show, didn't like it, which comes to my second point. I'm going to treat the first half of this review basically like the film is a completely pure original idea. It's no adaptation whatsoever. Just to talk about the film itself, and then in the second half, talk about the adaptation and what went wrong with the adaptation, as well as what is wrong with the original thing and why adaptation doesn't work so well with it. And I will be fair in that section, I think there are one or two points which actually does improve on the original idea. It's a hard place to start with where to kind of dig into essentially a post-mortem of what went wrong with this project, because every aspect of production seems to have something just noticeably bad. I'd say the primary problems are the characters and the character writing, as well as the pacing of the entire thing. I'll start off with pacing because it just seems like the film just seems to be set on going at a very breakneck speed. It keeps introducing lots of themes and ideas that this book could kind of bring up, showcasing that this thing happens, that's a thing, let's move on to the next bit. I don't know, it has a lot of background interesting ideas that I think would make a much more interesting film to dive into, and then every single time it just seems to want to jump back to a really trite love story with no chemistry whatsoever, or a police investigation that it actually has no interest in the investigation because there's no investigating at any point in the entire film. It's a very distracted pacing. It just seems to be going every which way and just seems to be following whichever route seems the easiest way to take or what they think will be the most popular thing. And that plays into the characters as well, because Light, he's such a malleable character that there's nothing really to him. He just kind of changes depending on who's in the room, and because of that you have no sense of who he really is. He's got a girlfriend that is just kooky, I suppose. That's the way that you describe it. Apparently she's the most popular girl in school, but I feel like that's just because that's a tag that needs to be included on the character model that she's trying to be. There's nothing in her character besides the fact that she's meant to be a tiny bit dark. The most interesting character is actually the guy's dad. Light's dad is a policeman and is in charge of heading up the investigation to find whoever's killing people. And so there's this conflict of he's trying to race to find the killer, but he doesn't know that the killer is his son. And so, Light knows that his father's on the task force, and so it's kind of, when they are talking, it's at least there's a morality back and forth. But again, Light just seems to be if he needs to be the villain in a scene, he'll be the villain. If he needs to be the patsy in a scene, he'll be the patsy. He's just kind of there for the ride for most of it, and it's a very reactive character, not a proactive character. It's just the fact that there's nothing to him, and so there's nothing to get attached to. They kind of flit about what kind of story they're doing. So at the beginning, it's sort of like a dark horror short story almost at the beginning, which I quite enjoyed. Obviously Adam Wingard is a director that has his roots in horror, and so that's understandably why it's the best element of this film. Then it kind of tries to go into semi-romance, as I said, although that's never really... There's no chemistry between the two characters whatsoever, and they feel like they just get into a relationship just because of plot. It's not anything that the characters want themselves, it's just because of circumstance and because the writer says so. From that it goes into sort of police investigation, then sort of thriller, again sort of because it keeps changing scene by scene what it wants, and so at the end you're left with the film just thinking what was it trying to do at all. And so even though I said I liked the horror bits in the beginning, there's moments like the scene that's getting passed around on the internet now where Light sees Ryuk, the death god, for the first time. However, after the whole screaming thing, when Ryuk's just in the background, that bit's genuinely creepy. It's still early in the film, but it was the moment where I sat up and thought this could actually be going in a good direction. It was really well handled how creepy he was, and they did the trick where Light is always in the foreground and Rick's always in the background, kind of out of focus, just with the glowing eyes, and that really works for the idea of him almost being like a literal like devil on the shoulder character.
Shh. Listen. Go check it out.
Like playing with the reality of it and making him like a demonic voice in his ear. That's what's most interesting with it. And then within the same scene, they just drop that, and it still plays up from time to time. But there's like in the same scene, then he like later like starts handing him pens and things like that. And it just removes any of the creepiness of it.
I don't have a pen. It's a good thing that you have a pen.
Again, it's like 70% the writing and the pacing of the writing, and then 30% the directing and the editing, because the editing does not help this choppy pace. Like, it is just going from shot to shot to shot, like scene to scene to scene, very jarringly. At the point where like I paused the film to see how far along we were, because it was moving at such a ridiculous pace, as well as the film just seemed to end mid-scene. Why? Did the writers just give up? Did they just like stop on the page? That's how it felt. So yeah, if my thoughts aren't clear at this point, I did not like this film. I think it's stupid. I don't think it's the worst film made this year by far. It's not one of those, like, I just think that it's one of these things where it's a B movie with the budget of an A movie, and that's what has caused a lot more attention to it. And honestly, I think it will just be a forgettable thing that maybe some might point it as a case of bad adaptation, as I'll get into later, but that's the only case of it being fans of the original thing remembering it, as opposed to people legitimately just remembering this as its own project. It's just forgettable and bad. Great. So into the adaptation part, which I will go into spoilers at some point. To give a representation of what I think of the original TV series, let's show the last 15 seconds of the opening to the first half of the show. So yeah, it's over the top, overly dramatic, but it's succinct, and you kind of get the idea of the religious imagery of all of that, and it's clear what kind of imagery, stuff that they're setting up for. Now let's show show the last 15 seconds of the second half of the series. That's kind of how the plot feels. 2/3 of the series feel like that plot-wise. It's a complete mess, honestly, I found, and I did not like it. And while I did enjoy the first third of the series, it's not even like with some series where I can say there's a cut-off point where stop watching at this episode. It's just really easily glides into terrible, and it's just left the whole series with a bad taste in my mouth. In the beginning, the best part of this show is that there is a cat and mouse element between Light and a detective trying to find the killer called Elle. And the back and forth between them is interesting because you have a character that has a book that can kill anyone, so he's very essentially overpowered in this scenario, and you have a person that's just clever. And it's about a kind of a battle of the wits and seeing how someone can get by just on their intelligence to get the upper hand on someone like that, as well as it's sort of a play on the idea of a protagonist as well, because you're so used to the protagonist being the good guy, but here the protagonist is the killer itself, and you're following him trying to escape the detectives. With the American version, that is the bit that it really loses. And again, I'm not saying that the adaptation necessarily has to follow the exact same plot of that cat and mouse thing. It's just that the main problem is Light, the main character, because as I said in the first half, he's a very malleable character, and I think at the end of the day it just comes down to the protagonist thing. The whole point of the Japanese one is that he's a protagonist that you are meant to kind of root for, even though he's doing the bad thing. Or maybe you could agree with him. Again, that's an ideological challenge if you want. But the idea is that he is killing people and he is the protagonist, and the antagonist is trying to save people. So it's different. But in the American version, it feels like they're really reluctant to make Light an unlikable character. And because of that, whenever he kills, it makes it feel kind of half-assed. For occasions, he really wants to do it, and then he just seems to be very wishy-washy on whether or not he wants to do it. And so there's not a, like I said, there's not a real core to his character. There's nothing to root for with him, because you don't know which side of the argument he's going to be on in which scene. And like, some of his actions just feel like they're pushed by other characters, and not in a interesting, manipulative way. And I think a real problem with this is that the fact is, when there is a part of the plot where he is actively doing stuff, that's like a very quick montage. When he really starts killing, they really gloss over it to the point where like they don't even show him reacting to anything like that. It's just kind of, all the killing happened, let's forget that. This is still the protagonist, you still like him, right? One thing I will say about the adaptation is that I think it didn't do it, but I think it offered a better ending. Where the TV show heads, it's trying to finish off the cat and mouse game as a logical thing. Like, it's who can finally outsmart the other one. While it's fun for the majority of the plot, I don't think it's a fun ending, because it's the idea of, like I said, you have a person that's a very overpowered character. When the protagonist ultimately loses despite having such a leg up, it kind of feels a bit of a letdown. But at the same time, you know he is the bad guy, and so he can't win at the end. It's kind of like the Breaking Bad scenario. And what I think this film does cleverly is that it changes it from a logical ending, like who can finally beat the other one, to who can break the other one, and so it's a more emotional ending. And I think the closest kind of comparison that you can come to is the idea of, that's been brought up a lot in recent media, but the idea of the Batman and Joker ideologies kind of clashing. Light is a character that kills for justice. L, like the antagonist, is a very just character. He does not kill whatsoever. Like, that's his one rule, kind of similar to Batman. And so what the film proposes is that it provides a scenario where the only way that L, the detective, can win is by breaking his one rule. And so therefore it's like an emotional ending as opposed to the logical ending, which I think is actually a much better way to wrap up the story than, like I said, a very an unfulfilling ending that a logical one would provide. Like I also said, the film doesn't go through with this because it seems to end mid-scene. Whether or not they want an ambiguous ending to leave it open for a sequel is maybe what they hoped for, I have no idea. Or maybe it was just bad writing all the way through. I have no idea why they decided to end it mid-scene. One final point I forgot to make in the film section is the music, where kind of what's similar to Adam Wingard did in The Guest, it has a kind of 80s synth score, which I think works well in 2 scenes, and then really does not work well in others. Again, it's another case of every single aspect of this film, despite having maybe good bits, always has a bit which is more noticeably bad. It's not really a style over substance argument, or the idea of, it's becoming cliche that this director uses 80s scores. It's just more the fact that it really did not fit the moment, and if in fact it just utterly clashed with the moment. You could argue that it was for the sake of dark comedy. However, at this point, the only comedy I'd had throughout the entire film was the quality of the film itself. So introducing a dark comedy element right at the end doesn't make sense in my mind, if that's the argument that you're going with. If you can't really tell, this is a film that people are going to like to hate for this week. It's the film of the week to hate. It's a bad film. You can very easily pick out its flaws, and that's why a lot of critics are kind of doing their more enjoyable let's trash on this film reviews at the moment. And that's kind of aided by the whole the existing fan base from the TV show. But like I said, I didn't even like the original TV show. I think this is worse, definitely, but I think that some aspects it does take and improve the quality of them, but that's in the minority. Thank you very much for watching. If you're watching because you're a fan of the original TV show, I have also covered anime in the past, and there'll be a playlist somewhere on screen, as well as a link to subscribe to the channel, as well as other films reviews that we've done.